Welcome everyone. This is our Voice to Parliament referendum Q&A session, and it's my privilege to have Dale Agius, Commissioner for First Nations Voice South Australia. Welcome, Dale.
Yeah, thank you.
Dale's got a bit of a husky voice because he's been yelling and screaming over the weekend because he coaches a football team and his A and B's won. Is that right?
Celebrations.
Yeah. Celebrations.
It's been a big weekend, but all good. I'm the president of the football club.
Oh my gosh.
So it's bringing it all together, and we got up a division now, so it's been a big weekend.
Oh, fantastic. Well, congratulations. Congratulations to the A's and B's. And Gawler South won the Barossa Light Gawler Football Association A grade.
Congratulations to them.
Yeah, no, they were top of the table all year, and they won. They were behind because we were watching it. They were behind, but then they came up and they beat Newry. So I'm really, really happy that they won. So yeah. Anyway, that's enough about football. On the 14th of October, we're going to have a referendum, and Australians will be asked to vote on changing the Constitution to recognise First Peoples of Australia. I'm really excited about referendums. I love voting. I love voting in federal, state, local. Anytime I get to vote, I think it's a privilege. We're very lucky in Australia that we can get to do this. On referendum day, voters will be asked to vote either yes or no to this question, which is a proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve this proposed alteration? It's important that everyone can participate in safe and respectful conversations about the upcoming referendum. And we're going to have a balanced conversation here today. Council has an important role in providing our community, with the information and resources needed so each community member can make their own decision regarding their vote in the upcoming referendum. And we recently asked our community for some questions, and I'm going to ask Dale these questions. We might get cracking, but before I do that, this book is in our library, The Voice to Parliament. It's written by Thomas Mayor and Kerry O'Brien, and our friendly library staff will show you where it is and you can borrow it. And it's quite a balanced book on how you go about and what information you might need for you to vote either yes or no. Where did the idea of a Voice to Parliament come from? Was it from Aboriginal people or from politicians?
That's a great first question. I think first up, important to say that this is an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander idea and concept. The background that sort of comes from leads into the Kirribilli Statement, which was a meeting with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leaders, meeting with then Prime Minister Tony Abbott and Opposition Leader Bill Shorten, who then put forward the Referendum Council working group. Yeah. That working group then put forward a bit of a conversation across the country. Yeah. We know them as regional dialogues. Regional dialogues happen in every state across the country. In Adelaide, we had 120 members meet at the Convention Centre. Oh. Those 120 members then chose delegates to represent South Australia at the National Constitution at Uluru. It was during the regional dialogues conversations, the concept of a Voice to Parliament was first floated, given that there was some heavy conversations around Aboriginal communities working on how they could improve the relationship between communities and government. Yeah. Right, because we knew that there was a bit of a disconnect and a bit of mismatching in terms of good intentions and goodwill and positive outcomes for Aboriginal communities. So something needed to be discussed to improve that sort of the gap. Yeah. So then after a series of regional dialogues, the delegates met at the Uluru Convention and again spoke in more detail around how to improve this relationship between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and the governments across our countries, both at national level, state level, and importantly at local council level. Yes. And they decided that, this long-standing issue of having Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people recognised in the Constitution was a good thing and had a lot of bipartisan support, so a lot of strong political will. but also a lot of community goodwill where, recognising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to be visible in the Constitution, as we know it's silent now currently, was the first key step. But the second part about that was, how do we engage this in a process to support meaningful engagement with Aboriginal communities to get better outcomes for our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities across our country. So after the regional dialogues and after the Uluru National Constitutional Convention, that's a bit of a tongue twister, and after 3 days of sitting, they released the Uluru Statement from the Heart.
Yes.
Right, so the Uluru Statement from the Heart has actually had a long-standing history of background that got to that point, with a lot of heavy engagement with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. Of course, not every Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community has been in that process, but there's been a lot of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from organisations, from communities, from leaders, all sorts of aspects of our community pulled together to have those conversations.
That's how long did that take?
The Kirribilli Statement is 2015, and there's probably 10 years of lead-up work to get to that point.
Yes. So
2015, of course, rolling out then, the Uluru Statement from the Heart is released in 2017. So 2 years of work in terms of to go through the regional dialogues and the National Convention at Uluru.
Yes.
Then, of course, presenting the Uluru Statement from the Heart as an invitation from those leaders to the then Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull. Of course, in that conversation that unfolded under his leadership.
Yes.
Then going into another invitation to then incoming Prime Minister Scott Morrison.
Yes.
And then seeing how that played under his leadership. Then we go into an incoming fresh federal election.
Yes.
And then opposition leader Anthony Albanese commits to supporting the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full, and says if his party is able to win government and form government, they will commit the country to a referendum.
Yes.
And hence here we are during his leadership.
Yes.
So almost, 9 years on from the invitation of the Uluru Statement.
Yes.
9 years to get to this point. Adding to that the previous 10 years of leading work.
That's a long time.
So it's a long time to get to this point.
That's a long time.
And Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been discussing these matters for a very long time. This is not a new concept for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. This is something that we've tried to get raised up over decades. If we look back in the history books of previous advisory groups and leadership groups, recognising there's a systemic block or a systemic issue in terms of the way that it's actually formulated in our feedback to high levels of government.
Yes.
It needs to be sharpened and improved. And the way they thought that was best to do was not to rest on the laurels of political will by political parties winning government, but to entrench something in our constitution so it's actually standard.
Yes.
It becomes standard practice of operation.
Yes. Yeah. I've got another question.
Sure.
Why is it important for an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice to be included in the Constitution?
Yeah, great question. Probably a little bit flying up from what we just spoke about.
Yes.
We can do what we're currently doing, which is waiting on political parties to appoint advisory bodies and advisory groups.
Yes.
And every government since the beginning of federation has done that.
Yes.
Trying to speak to Aboriginal people to work out how they should engage with their communities. Of course, as our politics has sharpened up in our country, so has our political parties and so have their political leaders. And what has been found by the communities is we're tired of getting political parties who pick community representatives who support their party narrative.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So that's
So it's
a key one.
It's a political statement rather than something coming from the community.
It feels like it's getting away from our community's perspective.
Yeah.
Is that politicians and leaders within political parties and who form government speak to those Aboriginal people who are more favourable to their way of thinking.
Yes.
And that's all well and good to try and get their political outcomes. But from a community perspective is what's being fed back, particularly to Aboriginal community leaders, is that's not representative of our community issues. Hence why the community issues on the ground feel like they've been falling behind. And particularly even now that we can get data recognising that in that sort of narrative to say that the issues that we know in Aboriginal communities under the closing gap indicators are now falling behind ever since they've been mapped.
Yes.
And that's only since then. They've been falling behind ever since the lead up to then. So the idea of having hand-picked government leaders, representatives by government to speak to Aboriginal communities who they want to speak through by their hand-picking is not working.
Mm.
Let's put something that's formalised in an actual structural system, like everything else. And as said by the Solicitor General, that this is something that will improve the democratic system of our Parliament, to give a representative body in the system of Parliament and government, to sharpen up the way they do things and an accountable way to do things. Like everything, we want more accountability, more transparency and more public scrutiny, so all Australians know what's going on in that space. Because that's where we, so that we can all vote on what they're doing well and what they're not doing well, and we all know about it.
Okay. Next question. What opportunities will a voice to Parliament create for Aboriginal people and their communities?
Another great question. I can relate this one back to South Australia. Right, because South Australia, as you know, has gone through the process of designing some legislation and a state model. And it goes against, this sort of idea that it's only a national-based voice. What South Australia has been able to design is a regional model where we create regional coordination through regional elections to structure up something at a regional level for those representatives to come together across the region and work through their problems and their solutions. As we know, because that's where the solutions are generally sought out on. At regional level. We've got 6 regions in South Australia. Those 6 regions will choose 2 co-chairs, a male and female co-chair. 6 regions, 2 co-chairs will have 12 to formulate the state voice. That state voice can then have the opportunity through the legislation to speak to the Parliament and to the government. That's done through 4 mechanisms in the legislation. One is to make an annual address into Parliament in a joint sitting, so you can get an independent representative from the voice to go through the state priorities from the regions and put forward from an Aboriginal community perspective in an annual report to the Parliament, which is non-political. It's based on community needs and desires and aspirations. That's then fed back to a joint sitting.
So it comes from the bottom up. It comes from the communities. From the communities themselves, their issues, their solutions will be brought forward and they'll be heard.
That's it. That's exactly it. And then it's tabled in an annual report to the Parliament. Mechanism 2 is for the members of the State First Nations voice to speak to the Premier and his Cabinet twice a year. Just to follow up on the issues that were tabled in the annual report. To speak to the Premier and to public servant chief executives twice a year to see how government agencies are responding to the political commitments made by the government of the day. And then the 4th one is to speak to the Premier, any minister and any public chief executive around an issue that's important to Aboriginal communities in an annual engagement hearing. So
it's all about Aboriginal communities' issues, but also what they want to do about it.
Correct. And those issues being front and centre of discussions for decision making in a way that government enacts their legislation and their policies, their programs and their initiatives.
Great. Next question. Will a voice to Parliament help Indigenous communities at the ground level? I think we touched on that before, but I think it's important to just understand that at the ground level, at the community level, how will people benefit?
Yeah, very good question. I think to get to the heart of this question is to understand what's currently at play. Right, so you've got a few things that are currently at play. The way that communities inform the government on what's happening, let's say through the public service, is they do that through public service reporting, through a briefing between an agency and the responsible minister. Right, and that briefing focuses on a couple of key areas for that particular matter, and then that gets fed to the government for their consideration. Some of the briefing in that detail might not go and cover the extent of the broader issues which impact some of those core problems which have been found by our communities or experienced by our communities. So some of the important detail is left off.
Oh, that's no good. That's terrible.
Terrible way of working, but it's what we work under currently. And that's in the public service through government.
Yeah.
The other way we do that is through community services, through the NGO sector
Yes.
or through the Aboriginal Community Control sector. The way, of course, they operate is through funding criteria. Right, and those funding criteria are to hit certain areas which are mandated
They're
or supported from the government.
They're predetermined.
Predetermined from the government of the day.
Oh.
So
it's top down.
Top-down approach.
Mm.
So if they don't actually meet the needs or requirements of what's being asked by Aboriginal communities, we're missing the mark.
Mm.
And they don't readjust the way those things are tended or processed or designed and implemented. So they already get enacted. And as we know now, all the heavy investment, the goodwill, the good intentions all get laid there, but they're misguided and they miss the mark.
Yes.
And so the Aboriginal communities don't actually experience the outcomes which are intended for them. So in between the government briefing model or the model of communication between the NGO sector or the Aboriginal Community Control sector and funding criteria are not working for Aboriginal communities. So the way that we can sharpen those up is to, if we've got good intentions and goodwill with good guided advice, we can actually sharpen up the way that we actually intend our legislation, our policies, our programs, our funding, make them more accountable and transparent, and potentially improve the outcomes which are happening for Aboriginal communities. That's the design of what the Voice can do.
That's an excellent model. What you've just said.
Yeah.
What you've just said is excellent, because it needs to come from the bottom up. It can't come from the top down. It needs to come from the bottom up, from people who live and work in those communities and know the issues and know what the solutions are.
Yeah, and as we know for anything anybody who's experienced the space is bottom up approaches which respond to current day issues, and they hit the marks within required timeframes to get to what we need to get positive outcomes. Top down approaches often have a policy lag, a funding lag. It's 6 months out of time.
Yes.
It's 12 months out of time. There's a drag before a next political topic is put on the agenda. They argue and debate that sort of stuff. Again, there's no consultation with Aboriginal communities. It becomes very messy.
No consultation.
No consultation. No guided allocation of budget. No transparency for that. No understanding from the Aboriginal communities what they need or what they require. And this is status quo, right? This is what we call status quo. This is currently happening right now.
Yeah. Right. A different question now.
Okay.
What benefits will it bring to the broader community and society?
A very good question. I guess what it'll bring is a level of clarity. And I say that because it'll bring a level of transparency and a public scrutiny to what's happening for our communities. The way that the Voice intends to improve this is to provide their reports to the Parliament in a public, transparent way, to hold politicians to account, whether they're forming government or whether they're in opposition or whether the independents. Let's get the issues from Aboriginal communities firsthand.
Yes.
Not something driven by a political agenda or a political narrative. Let's hear what's directly happening on the ground, and let's make decisions around that basis. Because it feels, and the sense from Aboriginal communities is that there's a sense of losing that voice.
Yes.
That's not politically driven. And I'm not here to, slander politicians.
No.
I'm here to give a representative from what the community has told me.
I think politicians go in with the best of intentions, and they want the system to work. They want the system to work, and they probably need some of this advice.
Yeah, and any coordinated governing body eventually seeks some sort of advice from any cohort of people they're dealing with or trying to respond to. The Voice to Parliament is no different. The way that it's been structured and proposed to be structured is to have elected members from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, for those members to be then representative spokespeople for their communities to raise those issues up, then to coordinate a way of regional problem solving or regional decision making and creating regional priorities for them to be more clearly presented to the Parliament.
It makes it easier for the politicians then, doesn't it?
Sort of. You'd hope so. It will make it easy in terms of the information that's being provided to the Parliament. What, of course, is the Parliament is going to challenge then is how it responds to this direct feedback.
Yes.
Because they're not accountable to it currently.
No.
To this direct and real-time feedback, which creates political accountability for all sides of parliament, for all sides of parliament, for all sides of any political party. If you've got a real issue on the table, and how you choose to respond to that feedback is the change of the process for our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, and that's something that we're excited about.
Yeah.
We're excited to have something, an opportunity to have a voice in that space, where decisions that are having a direct impact on our communities are then put in a way that's real time from our communities. It's transparent. Politicians know about it, but even for the sake of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, the broader public know about it. They don't feel like they're fighting this battle all by themselves and being this runaway cowboy sort of community. They actually can inform parliaments what's happening. They can inform the broader community what's happening, and we get those issues more broadly supported in this whole process.
Thank you for that. That was a really comprehensive answer. Now, a different kind of question. Why do you suppose some Indigenous peoples are suggesting voting no?
Yeah, look, like any community, there's a couple of things why people are voting no. There's not one sort of answer to why Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are voting no.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We're all individuals.
We're all individuals.
We're all individuals. Yeah.
I guess some of that goes to some things that they might be asking for are being met.
Yes.
They're finding that the goodwill and good intentions of some of the designs are actually meeting their needs. Others might be experiencing, that what we call public distrust of government, because this is now becoming a public agenda. The long-lasting legacy of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander distrust of our governments is playing into this conversation a little bit for those who extremely distrust the government.
Yeah, that's true.
And the third, the third or fourth thing might be particularly for people in my career. Not every Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people know the systems at play. Yes. Being those systems in terms of the political system, the parliamentary system, the bureaucratic system within the government, the systems within the NGO sector, the issues within the charitable sector, the issues within philanthropic funding sectors. Yes. All these sectors have some sort of engagement with our communities. Yes. And that some of them interact, some of them don't. What the concern is, the things that don't interact need some more visibility. Yeah. Because there's good intentions and well-meaning people in all these organisations.
Of course, yes.
But the voice is designed to bring all those things together to narrow the scope on where demand should be focused. Because that's what's being asked from our communities. Yeah. And quite often you hear, we all know. You
sort of want to cut to the chase, don't you?
Cut to the chase of it. Yeah. Let's cut out all the blurriness. Yeah. Go straight to the heart of what the issues are from an Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander community lens. And let's respond to that because that's what they're asking for.
And I've gone to national conferences and I meet Aboriginal people and they're always inspiring to me. They're always so inspiring. And it really is a privilege to be in their presence, because they're just so wise.
That's what I found in some of the state engagements we've gone to is I've been in every regional community across our state. And the absolute wisdom and knowledge of those people in regional areas of our state who know how to interact with their local council and state government and federal government. This is no new game to them. Yeah. They've been involved in this for decades.
They have, and they're probably getting a bit tired, and but they have such deep wisdom. It just exudes. It just drips off them.
The knowledge.
It drips off them. It drips off them, and you go, "You are so wise. You're so wise."
And I think that's part of this is part of this whole voice system is acknowledging the knowledge and wisdom of those community leaders who have been dealing in this space for so long, to help them to coordinate in their regions and to help their regional voices get a point of escalation when they need it.
Yeah, and to develop leaders in their own community
and develop leaders. Yeah, because as you know, some leaders can often feel like they're screaming from the mountaintops.
Oh, yeah.
They're not getting heard. No. There's no response. There's no structural way of engaging with that voice. So the voices just feel like it's lost in the wind.
Yes.
Let's sharpen that up so when they actually do, when we do have knowledgeable leaders speaking about these things, we capture it.
Yes.
And we put it in a way that's documented, and then we get that document tabled in the Parliament.
Okay. Different question again.
Okay.
Right. How will a voice to Parliament function?
Good question. Currently in South Australia, I guess I can use a South Australian model, is we've got the regional voices,
Yes.
then into the state voice. What we've talked about at a state level here in South Australia is having a direct line of sight. All right, so when we've got all the structures of regional voices set up, and they do their regional priorities, they of course coordinate that in a state report.
Yes.
That state report then brings together the broader priorities for our regions and our state.
Yeah.
Our next line of sight would be at a national level.
Yes.
Right, so our national level could have the state priorities from our South Australian regional voices.
Yes.
Those collated and tabled in our state parliament, and then we can work out what we need to put out of our priorities to put on the national agenda.
Yes.
And that becomes what we know now as a direct line of sight.
Yeah.
It'll only improve the relationship between local councils,
Yes.
the state government, and the federal government.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. Final question.
Okay.
What is the best way or best sources of information to learn more about the voice?
So the best ways to learn information and detail around the voice is to look at all the information that's out there.
Yeah.
There is a lot of books that are out there, published in terms of the Referendum from the heart, books that go into some of the perspectives of wide-ranging leaders who are experienced in this space. There's also feedback from local communities who will see what they see as the potential improvements for their communities when their voices are escalated at that level. You've got books.
Yeah.
There's a booklet on the National Aboriginal Indigenous Agency, which of course is the federal agency, which goes into the booklets in terms of the explainer of the pre-referendum process.
Yes.
In the question that you read out, the proposed alteration. It also goes into some of the post-referendum detail of what happens in terms of the consultation and legislation design of what's happening potentially after a successful referendum.
Yeah.
And in terms of what's happening in South Australia, of course, we've been leading this space in terms of across our state and this nation.
It's fantastic.
It's been very exciting.
It's been really exciting. Is that why they're all coming here? They're doing their launches, because they did a launch in Elizabeth, and then I think the Liberal Party's coming here to launch something. Yeah.
South Australia is seen as a key leader in terms of our reforms. Of course, we were the first state to give women a vote.
Yes.
We were the first state to have the Aboriginal Lands Council enacted in legislation. So as Australia is seen as a mover and shaker and a reformative state who can support positive change.
Yes.
So we've had.
Isn't that exciting?
It's so cool. It's so cool. It's very cool, particularly when you've got representatives from South Australia playing in that national stage, and all the other states looking at South Australia in terms of how we've been so progressive in the past. Do we back our South Australian population to be along those lines still?
Yes.
So we had the launch of the Yes campaign here in Tandanya.
Yes.
We had the Prime Minister announce the date here at Elizabeth.
Yes, they did.
And of course we had the state walks across each state and territory for the Yes walks.
Yes.
There was over 10,000 people that attended the Victoria Square. And we were the first one to go. So, ours was the sort of gauger to see if there were a lot of people that would turn up for the walk here in South Australia.
And they did, right across Australia, in Sydney.
It was phenomenal numbers. It was so exciting to see so many people turn out.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that gives you some confidence, hopefully.
It was a breath of fresh air in terms of real people showing up, saying that they're engaged in the conversation.
Yes.
Or if some even weren't there engaged in the conversation, some were there to learn.
Yes.
Some were there to see what it's all about.
Yes.
And sometimes just about getting out there and being involved and showing up to some community event and asking people firsthand, why are you here?
Yeah.
What information have you got?
Yeah.
And particularly from our end, it just breaks that media narrative that we get hounded with at the moment, we can go and hear some community voices direct hand.
Yes, yeah. I think it's comforting, but also exhilarating at the same time when you see so many people come out. And I saw people in Melbourne and Sydney, and I think I'm not sure if they've done one in Brisbane. I can't remember,
Yeah.
but so many people turned out, and I think has to fill people with confidence. But let's see where it goes, I guess.
Fingers crossed. There was a bit of inspiration for those events across the state and
Yes.
across the country.
Yes, yeah. Look, I'd like to thank you for coming along today to explain some of the questions that our community has posed, and it's been really, really helpful. I'm sure many people who are listening have found that exceptionally helpful. So hopefully this provides some balance to the conversation where we're in an apolitical space, we're a local council, we're just providing information to our community about the voice to Parliament, but also the referendum itself. So good luck with your choice, and thank you so much, Dale, for coming along.
Thank you. Good to have a chat.